A lot of today's medicine is about finding cures based on careful experimentation and observation. This is the essence of scientific medicine, which we take for granted. But for most of history, doctors have not used this scientific approach. They had different ideas about medicine. Why did things change? Teachers in the medieval universities would not have understood scientific ways of looking at medicine. They believed the best way to learn medicine was through reading ancient books and following them exactly. This is a typical lecture from a medieval professor, Bartholomew of Bruges, in about 1320. Telling his students why they should study the ancient Greek writer Galen.
Some students are lazy. They want to be educated without doing the work. Others are thick-headed. They rush through books and then forget them. Others have no enthusiasm. Galen has written the best book for these students. It is called The Art of Medicine. No other book has so much in it. No other book is so easy to remember. Most importantly, this book is written by Galen, and after Hippocrates, Galen is the best writer. This book is accurate and contains everything you want in medicine. It ought to be read first, before all other books.
No one ever suggested they should test Galen's ideas or try anything different to what Galen had said. Galen's work was considered to be better than the work of anyone alive. This was teaching in the medieval universities, to look back, almost without question, to the work of people who lived 1,000 years before. The Renaissance was the rebirth of learning, an exciting time for intellectuals and artists. During the Renaissance, scholars became even more interested in the ancient world. And as they found out more, some scholars also began to ask questions and to think scientifically. At first, scholars only knew the ancient medical books as Latin translations. By 1500, as more people learned Greek, they could read Greek writers in their original language, and it became fashionable to copy ancient Greek ways. Scholars saw how some ancients were interested in observation and in discussing ideas. They began to experiment and to use these ideas to develop medicine. They saw the difference between medieval art and Greek art. Greek and Roman statues seemed to be more realistic. The body was shown with muscles and sinews. And in returning to these ancient traditions, looking for yourself, trusting your eyes, searching out what's real, some scholars found themselves in a dilemma, because by looking too hard, they found themselves disproving some of the things the ancients had believed to be true. One of these scholars was Andreas Vesalius. Vesalius was born in 1514 in Belgium. His father was an apothecary. His grandfather was a doctor. Even as a boy, Vesalius used to trap small animals near his home so he could dissect them. By the age of 23, he was Professor of Anatomy at the University of Padua in Italy. At first, like every other student, he used Galen's work and followed it closely. Aged 19, he even stole the skeleton of a hanged convict to keep in his room. But the more he saw, the more he came to realise that Galen had actually made mistakes.
Stop it, you're annoying me.
I know, and it's especially annoying because I'm right.
You are not right.
I don't know what it would take to convince you. If Galen said we had 3 arms, would you believe him? He says the human jawbone has 2 bones. Now, the monkey's jawbone, I grant you, has 2 bones, but the human jawbone has 1. Look at it.
In 1540, for 8 months, Vesalius shared a room with a student from England called John Keyes. Keyes firmly believed in Galen's work and thought Vesalius was wrong to disagree. For Keyes, any mistakes in Galen were mistakes made by translators or copyists, not by Galen himself.
I had a letter from Bologna this morning. They have another manuscript to show me. Definitely Galen. Just a scrap, 2 or 3 sides, but it's old.
In Greek?
In Greek, yes. Perhaps his original text.
If I had money for every time you said that. I mean, I don't want to laugh, but this is just childish. We've versions of Galen in Arabic, we've versions of Galen in Latin, and everyone says 2 bones in the jawbone. You say they are written by some illiterate monk in some monastery where they hardly know enough Latin to say grace. Well, maybe, but everyone, if you ever find this precious original, it will say 2 bones in the jawbone. I wonder how your pig-headed arrogance will stand up then.
Perhaps Keyes was right to defend Galen. Galen had been copied and recopied in Arabic and Latin for centuries. Until now, no one had bothered to track down Galen's original Greek work. But Keyes' argument with Vesalius was more than just a disagreement about translations. Vesalius was asking him to question the faith in the ancients, which had been unquestioned for centuries. Galen was the authority. This is what Keyes said about Galen.
Galen and Hippocrates brought the science of medicine to perfection. Hippocrates, so Galen tells us, found out the method of healing people, while Galen made everything straight and true, just like a Roman emperor laying out a Roman road.
To criticise Galen was professionally dangerous. At first, Vesalius kept his ideas to himself, but as he grew more certain, he began to share his claims with his students.
He said, from his reading, that perhaps Galen never actually performed a human dissection. He says Galen would only have learned bits of anatomy. The stomach he saw in Egypt, and when he was working as a doctor in the gladiator school, he would have seen some deep wounds. But for the rest, he must have relied on animals. And that explains his mistakes.
But he spells out the differences between people and animals. The fingers of a monkey, huh? The knee joint.
Yes, exactly, but you see, those examples you can see from the outside. You don't need to dissect. But when he writes of the kidney, and he says the left kidney is below the right, it's obvious he's talking about an ape. And because he did not dissect humans, he did not know that with humans it is different.
Unlike Galen, Vesalius was able to carry out many dissections. He could do what Galen hadn't been able to. He could provide an accurate map of the inside of the entire human body. Very soon, Vesalius also changed the way dissections were carried out. This picture shows the old way. A senior student sits on high, reading from Galen. The actual dissection, the cutting of the body, is left to a surgeon, while the professor simply points things out and discusses them. Vesalius criticised this method. He wrote,
The professors have never used a knife. except at a dinner table. They repeat things they've never seen, but just memorized from other people's books. The students have to fight for a good view, but end up seeing less than they could at some butcher's stall. It's like watching someone else drink when you're thirsty.
In 1540, Vesalius was asked to carry out a dissection in Bologna. One member of the audience, the German student Baldassar Hessler, took notes. His account and this picture show how Vesalius broke the rules.
Vesalius was the demonstrator, but right from the start he ignored the professor and the old men at the back and gave a lecture of his own. He invited us to gather round to see, even to touch, wonders we'd never experienced. He'd brought a skeleton into the room. He showed us the muscle in the corpse, and then on the skeleton, how the muscle moves the bone. And the professor butts in and says how these things are not the opinion of Galen, but we are seeing with our own eyes. And it was wonderful to see.
In 1543, still just 28 years old, Vesalius published his masterpiece, the Fabrica, a complete map of the human body. The bones, the muscles, the veins and arteries and nerves and organs, illustrated by artists in the new realistic style. The book was printed and read widely. Within a year or two, every medical student in Western Europe would see, for the first time, the body as it actually was. It didn't explain what caused ill health, but it helped the next generation of scientists to make new discoveries about the body. For traditional followers of Galen, the book was dangerous. Vesalius' old teacher, Gunther von Andernach, wrote that Vesalius should be punished by the emperor for the terrible things he was saying. But Vesalius won. The emperor ignored Andernach and appointed Vesalius as his physician. William Harvey also studied medicine at the University of Padua, about 50 years after Vesalius. Although Vesalius had shown that Galen could be wrong, most doctors were still relying on Galen's ideas. His work was reprinted many times in this period and widely read in the universities. Harvey used scientific methods to prove things. Instead of just accepting Galen's work, he carried out many of his own experiments on animals. This was how Harvey discovered that Galen was wrong about how the blood moved around the body. He came up with a completely new discovery of the circulation of the blood. By careful measuring, Harvey worked out that the amount of blood pumped by the heart was so much that it couldn't be used up in the way Galen described.
Galen said that the liver produces blood, which is used up for the body's food. What my work shows is that the blood is sent round the body by the heart. Furthermore, it is not used up. The same blood circulates round the body again and again.
By 1616, Harvey knew Galen had got it wrong. We can see this because some of his lecture notes are still preserved from that time. But it was still a big thing to argue that Galen was mistaken. So, over the next 12 years, he carried out many more experiments to prove his theories beyond all doubt. All of the demonstrations in this film were created by following Harvey's own instructions. He used methods such as tying up veins and arteries and pumping in water so he could see with his own eyes how fluid travelled through the heart. In Harvey's most famous experiment, he proved that blood only travelled round the body in one direction. He showed that if you put your finger above a valve in the vein of the arm and then flatten the vein up to the next valve, the vein cannot fill up again until you take your finger away. Blood can only flow in one direction through the veins. He'd already seen this working in animals. He'd put probes into veins and saw that the probe didn't get far if it was inserted the wrong way. If he inserted it in the other direction, it passed easily. Harvey felt this must be the way that blood travelled. He finally published his work in 1628. Now all his experiments could be copied. Any other scientist could check whether he was right. In his book, he pointed out that his work was based not on textbooks, but on dissections. His thinking can still be demonstrated today. This is another description from his work.
I took the shell from an egg and placed the egg in warm water. Here I could see a small spot which beat. I concluded that this was the beginning of life.
It's over 350 years since he wrote this, but we can still see what he saw. He was accurate because he relied on his own scientific observations and didn't just rely on what other people had written. Harvey's work made today's medicine possible. Understanding how the blood circulated meant that doctors in the future could develop blood transfusions and major surgical operations. Groundbreaking science was happening in the universities, but it had very little effect on the way medicine was practiced. Right up until the 19th century, most people were not using scientific medicine. People thought about the body and illness in a completely different way. Everyone, rich and poor, used herbs to make medicines. People believed that every plant was a possible cure. Its flowers, leaves, the bark of trees, seeds, stems, roots. Many people grew their own herbs or picked them from where they grew wild, as we can see in this image from the 15th century. We know, for example, that many herbs were used to make the body get rid of fluids. Some could make patients vomit. Senna was a laxative. Dandelions were used to make people urinate. Herbs could be boiled or dried and crushed in a mortar and pestle, then mixed with water or honey to make the medicine. If a recipe only used one herb, then it was called a simple. But there were also recipes that needed many ingredients. A medicine called theriac had been described in ancient times, and it needed more than 60 ingredients. There was a wide variety of medicine on offer. A lot of it was based on experience. People knew remedies worked because they'd worked in the past. There were also other theories. The theory of signatures meant that if a herb looked like a lung, it was used to treat the lung. Or if a walnut looked like a brain, it was used to treat the brain. Some medicine was based on ideas about magic, or according to star signs. People also bought the medicines ready-made. Shops like this existed in the 14th century. They were called apothecaries. The apothecary would make up prescriptions from the doctor or sell you his own medicines. These are apothecary signs from the 15th century. They chose to show themselves with a mortar and pestle. As well as plants, many medicines contain minerals like chalk, earth, gold, mercury, iron and salt. They also use parts of animals, bones, blood, hair and teeth. The stuffed crocodile was a kind of advertising gimmick, reminding the apothecary's customers that he was a man who was used to handling strange and exotic ingredients. By the 16th century, an apothecary like Vesalius' father could offer a much wider range of ingredients. When travellers sailed to India, Africa and the Middle East, the supply of spices like nutmeg, cloves and cinnamon increased. When they sailed to the Americas, they brought things which were completely unknown in Europe, different trees, oils and plants. All of these increased the range of cures on offer. The fashion for new medicines from abroad was used by the travelling doctors who turned up at country fairs with bottles of pills and potions. These doctors were often the only ones ever seen by people in the countryside, and they would carry out everything from taking out your teeth to selling you ribbons. Some of them were seen as genuinely useful, but many of the sources, like these cartoons, show them as con men and tricksters. And this is how they continued to be shown right up to the 19th century. Many people used these doctors, but most ordinary people didn't leave a written record. The people who did leave records were the university-educated doctors who were very opposed to anyone who had not been trained in a university. This is what John Keyes said about quacks.
They come from Italy, Greece, France, and Turkey, claiming to have come straight from the service of the emperor, promising to cure you with a drink of their potions. In my opinion, you should stay as far away from them as possible.
Well-educated doctors like Keyes still studied the books of the ancient Greeks from 1500 years ago and followed their ideas about balancing the body with regular bleeding, diet and exercise. John Keyes blamed many illnesses on lack of exercise and overindulgence in fine foods.
Englishmen these days are so delicate and womanly that they can hardly stand a bit of fresh air and a plain diet, unlike the Scots, who are much healthier. It starts with the children. Children nowadays are brought up in a way that if they don't spend the day sitting by the fire, wrapped in furs, eating buttered toast, they fall ill straight away.
As well as being treated by these doctors, people also relied very much on their own knowledge and the knowledge of their friends and neighbours. Rich and poor people alike took on the responsibility of treating themselves and making their own medicines. Doctors were all male, but in most households it was the women who made medicines and treated their families. We know this because of the recipe books that survive. In rich households throughout the land, the lady of the manor was expected to be able to prepare medicines. Recipe books like this were handed down from mother to daughter. Each owner added new recipes to them. No written records survive from poorer women, but historians believe that they also handed down recipes. They couldn't write, so they must have handed them down by word of mouth. There's very little evidence about this, but it is mentioned by some writers, such as Robert Burton, a doctor who wrote in 1621.
Many an old wife or countrywoman often does more good with a few common garden herbs than these loud-mouthed physicians with their far-fetched medicines.
There was a lot of opposition to women taking a leading role in medicine. When herbals began to be printed, they were herbals written by men. But books like these brought together the knowledge of many men and women. Scientific medicine today is very different to the medical care experienced by most people up until the 19th century. The work of scholars like Vesalius and Harvey had little effect at first, but most of today's medicine is based on their ways of working. They helped to start a scientific revolution.